Hey guys, tonight we're dipping our toes into a story that's bloodier than your Aunt Linda's steak and twice as hard to explain at Thanksgiving. We're talking about Elizabeth Bathory, the original Queen of the Night, the woman whose spa days were less self-care and more CSI, Transylvania. Yes, tonight you get to relax and drift off to sleep as we journey through the life and crimes of the world's most infamous noblewoman, whose idea of a bath bomb was young girl's blood. Before we get started, if you actually enjoy falling asleep to this type of history, please take a second to like and subscribe. Maybe even leave a comment with where you're listening from and your personal record for the most questionable beauty routine. Now, dim those lights, turn on a fan for that perfect white noise, and cocoon yourself in blankets. Maybe lock the bathroom door, just in case. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it was like to be the richest, most notorious woman in Eastern Europe before anyone invented crime podcasts? Was Elizabeth really bathing in blood? Or was she just the victim of a PR disaster so bad it makes celebrity tabloids look like a kind, nurturing place? How did you even get bloodstains out of a 16th century bedsheet? Did her servants ever unionize? If you were her guest, how many towel sets would you ask for before getting nervous? Could you survive a Hungarian winter in a stone castle surrounded by rumors, lawsuits, and what can only be described as the medieval version of a Yelp review bomb? Congratulations! You've just woken up in the Kingdom of Hungary, circa 1600, with a title you can't pronounce, a family tree more tangled than a phone charger, and a hostess whose idea of hospitality might just keep you up at night. Welcome to the world of Elizabeth Bathory. May your skin stay safely attached. Welcome to the Bathory family. If you thought your relatives were complicated, imagine keeping track of 30 cousins, 12 castles, and one ominous family reputation that makes every holiday meal feel like a Senate hearing. You are born into money, privilege, and the expectation that, if all else fails, you'll at least have a well-fortified wine cellar. Let's set the scene. You're not just anybody, you're a Bathory. That means your baby rattle is probably made of gold, your crib is hand-carved by someone who still believes in dragons, and your extended family tree is less tree and more overgrown jungle with surprise snakes. You don't just have a family crest. You have an entire medieval PowerPoint presentation, including a wolf, a sword, and possibly a tiny, angry angel that's supposed to symbolize justice, but mostly looks like he's late for dinner. Your parents are the medieval version of a power couple. Your mother? Descended from royalty, probably related to every other noblewoman within 200 miles, which makes weddings a little awkward and family reunions a breeding ground for future lawsuits. Your father? He's got more titles than your average Game of Thrones character, and slightly less emotional range. Together, they're a force of nature, especially when the taxes are due or the wine harvest comes in weak. Your early life is all about learning the rules. There are a lot of them, and most are contradictory. If you're a Bathory, you're supposed to be tough but graceful, educated but not so clever. You make your tutors look bad. Pious but not so pious that you make everyone else at church uncomfortable. And above all, you are expected to look like you woke up flawless, even when you clearly woke up with your hair resembling a medieval haystack. Family gatherings are an Olympic event in endurance. The dining hall is always drafty, the food suspiciously chewy, and there's at least one uncle who spends the entire meal complaining about how things were better before indoor plumbing, even though indoor plumbing won't be invented for another 2 centuries. Your cousins show up in the latest Hungarian fashions, which is just last year's Italian fashion, but with more fur and a vague sense of danger. There are so many Bathorys around the table, the only way to tell them apart is by counting whose jewelry clinks loudest when they gesture dramatically. You don't just inherit land and titles, you inherit baggage. There are whispered stories about your ancestors, passed down with the bread and the butter knives. Some were war heroes. Some were accused of things that would make even a modern true crime podcast hesitate. One Bathory ancestor reportedly rode into battle with a Bible in one hand and a broadsword in the other, which sounds inspiring until you realize he probably read neither. and used both for entirely the wrong reasons. And then there's the reputation. To be a Bathory is to be simultaneously respected, envied, and feared. Your family's coat of arms is on every local church pew, but so is the graffiti in the back, helpfully suggesting the Bathorys bathe more, invade less. You're the kind of aristocrat that peasants talk about when they need to scare their children into eating turnips. It's not easy, carrying the weight of a name that's always just one rumour away from being the next headline in the Hungarian weekly scandal sheet. Of course you have perks. There's the endless supply of cheese wheels, the fancy imported spices, and the sort of wine that makes you forget your fourth cousin twice removed is currently suing you over a goat. But there's also a downside. You can't ever just be normal. There are expectations, responsibilities, and the very real possibility that someday someone will write a book about your family, hopefully with fewer chapters about rot and more about roots. So as you finish your family supper, surrounded by portraits of relatives who all look slightly guilty, remember, being born a Bathory means you've already survived the hardest part, your own family. Just don't ask about the skeletons in the closet. They're probably on the guest list for next year's reunion. Childhood for you isn't swings and lemonade. It's running through echoing hallways, listening to wolves howl outside, and learning that bedtime stories involve a surprising amount of swordplay and political intrigue. Picture growing up in a place where the furniture is heavier than your secrets. Your home is not the warm, cozy cottage from fairy tales. It's a sprawling stone labyrinth with drafty corridors and ceilings so high they have their own weather system. The walls are lined with oil paintings of relatives, most of whom look deeply disappointed in you, even though you're 6 and haven't invented indoor plumbing yet. If you want to find the kitchen, you'll need a map, 3 days' worth of rations, and the courage to confront at least 2 family ghosts along the way. There are no nursery rhymes. Instead, your lullabies are sung by a nursemaid who's seen too much, with lyrics mostly about not trusting anyone named after a fruit. Toys are an afterthought. You might have a carved wooden horse, but you're far more likely to be entertained by a set of hand-me-down chainmail or a chess set missing half the pawns because last year's political squabble got out of hand. Your playmates? A rotating cast of distant cousins, tutors, and the occasional stray bat that gets lost in the rafters. You're expected to share your toys with them, but you learn early that anything you lend to a cousin will return sticky, broken, or with a mysterious bite mark. On rainy days you play hide and seek, which mostly turns into hide and contemplate your life choices, because some corners of the mansion are so dark and cold that even the rats file formal complaints. Bedtime routines are a performance art. First, you make sure the bed isn't already occupied by a wayward dog, a bored uncle, or last week's pile of unsorted tax documents. Then you brace yourself for the symphony of nighttime sounds, the wind rattling window shutters, the dull thud of a distant portcullis, and the sound of wolves howling somewhere just past the garden, probably arguing over whose turn it is to terrify the local livestock. The bedtime story is rarely gentle. Your governess has a limited selection. The Siege of Vienna, the tragic romance of your third great-aunt who married for love and died of regret, and the mysterious case of the cousin who vanished after making fun of a priest's hat. Occasionally, there's a moral, but it's usually trust no one or never challenge your grandmother to a duel. You fall asleep every night thinking about castle intrigue, military strategy, and how best to avoid being volunteered for piano practice. Breakfast in the Bathory mansion is less of a meal and more of a diplomatic negotiation. You try to avoid eye contact with the surly kitchen staff, who clearly blame you for the existence of silver polish. The bread is dense enough to be a weapon, and the jam has a flavour profile best described as seasonal uncertainty. If you spill your milk, it's a minor scandal. If you break a teacup, it becomes the subject of a stern family letter written in 3 languages. Your lessons begin promptly at dawn, taught by a succession of nervous tutors, none of whom last more than a year. You study Latin, fencing, and advanced staring out of windows dramatically. Failure to memorize the family genealogy is punishable by a stern lecture, and 3 hours in the room with the stuffed bear, whose glassy eyes seem to judge you for every mistake. You quickly become fluent in the art of looking busy while daydreaming about running away to a monastery. Of course, there are perks to mansion life: secret passageways, ancient libraries, and the world's best hiding spots for avoiding chores. There's also the annual festival, when everyone pretends to be normal for 3 days, eats alarming quantities of roast meats, and argues over who gets to ring the big bell. You get a sense of history, responsibility, and the creeping suspicion that your family's idea of fun is just a little different from everyone else's. So as you drift off to sleep, wrapped in 5 layers of scratchy wool, you dream of simpler times, times with fewer secret plots and more actual swings. But hey, at least you're never bored. In a Gothic mansion, even childhood is an adventure you can't quite escape. Your ancestors are a mix of warlords, saints, and people who definitely did not wash their hands enough. Family game night involves more dueling than charades, and everyone keeps reminding you, don't embarrass the Bathory name. Every time you pass a portrait in the hall, you're reminded just how varied the family resume is. There's Uncle Janos, who accidentally started a rebellion by throwing the world's least diplomatic dinner party. There's Great-Aunt Zed Sophia, who was canonized for her charity but whose letters reveal a suspicious fondness for poison mushrooms. And then there's a long line of stern-looking cousins, each staring down at you from their gilded frames as if daring you to pronounce their names correctly. If you get it wrong, family legend has it your soup will curdle for a month. Keeping track of Bathory lineage requires a flowchart, a magnifying glass, and a strong drink. There are more branches than an ancient oak, and every branch is eager to poke you. Some relatives are remembered for their contributions to the church or crown. Others are remembered for what happened to the church or crown after a particularly unfortunate jousting tournament. There's a recurring theme of ambition gone weirdly wrong. One ancestor even tried to breed a better horse by painting spots on a goat. Family reunions are equal parts social gathering and historical reenactment. You never know if you'll be handed a plate of pastries or a gauntlet and a formal challenge. Conversations move seamlessly from the weather bracing, as usual, to local politics. To that time, cousin Istvan allegedly swapped places with a monk to escape an awkward wedding proposal. If things get heated, someone will inevitably bring out the family sword collection for educational purposes, which is medieval speak for let's see who can best avoid injury this year. Bathory stories get bigger with every telling. That third cousin who once scared off a wolf in his nightshirt. By now, he's single-handedly defended the castle from an Ottoman horde, recited a poem, and invented the concept of brunch. Family pride means never letting the truth get in the way of a good anecdote. And every Bathory is convinced their branch of the family is the most important, except for that one time when everyone agrees it's your fault the roof leaked. Expectations are a family tradition. You're not just encouraged to succeed, you're required to do it dramatically. Remember who you are, your elders intone, conveniently forgetting all the times their own ambitions went up in smoke. At every meal, you're warned to uphold the family honor, avoid scandal, and never lose to a Habsburg in arm wrestling. The stakes are high, and so is the pressure. If you so much as sneeze out of turn at church, a second cousin will write it down for the family history. Of course, the family also has secrets. So many secrets. Hidden passageways, mysterious uncles who moved to the country and were never heard from again, and an alarming number of cryptic recipes for soup that includes ingredients you're pretty sure aren't legal even in 16th century Hungary. You learn to nod politely and never ask why there's a portrait in the cellar that everyone insists is just a coincidence. Family punishments are legendary. Embarrass the Bathory name, and you might find yourself sent to live with an aunt who considers cold cabbage a delicacy and believes silence is the best form of discipline. Redemption, if it comes, is usually a matter of outliving your mistakes or finding a new family scandal big enough to make everyone forget yours. Still, there's a strange comfort in it all. For every ancestor who started a war by accident, there's another who rescued a town, wrote poetry, or invented a new kind of cheese. For every stern lecture, there's a story about loyalty, resilience, and someone who laughed in the face of disaster, usually while falling off a horse. So you navigate your thorny family tree with a mix of caution and pride, knowing that every Bathory is a survivor, even if half of them probably should have been supervised more closely. At least you'll never be bored. After all, with roots like these, it's a miracle you can walk in a straight line. Etiquette lessons, language drills, and the unique experience of having a private tutor who may or may not be a failed alchemist. Your education is designed to prepare you for court, but mostly just to avoid public scandal. You wake each morning to the soft, soul-crushing clatter of silverware being arranged for the day's first lesson in proper table deportment. Nothing says childhood like the threat of a 16th century grandmother wielding a fork and a 3-hour lecture on the difference between commoner and noble chewing. Slouch, slurp, or misplace your napkin, and you'll be reminded that Bathories do not just eat, they perform. Breakfast is a theatrical production, starring you as child who must not embarrass anyone this week. The supporting cast, a small army of relatives, servants, and at least one chicken who keeps escaping from the kitchen and seems to judge your posture. After breakfast, it's straight to lessons. There are languages to master: Latin for God, Hungarian for the peasants, German for the Habsburgs, and French for showing off. If you get your declensions wrong, your tutor sighs so loudly you're worried he'll summon a minor demon out of disappointment. Your textbooks are mostly hand-me-downs, featuring helpful marginalia from a distant cousin who was either a genius or someone with severe penmanship issues. You try to memorize noble titles, prayer book passages, and a suspicious amount of diplomatic small talk, just in case you ever have to host a dinner for a duke or a visiting delegation of extremely bored Venetian merchants. Mathematics is covered too, but only up to the point where you can count wine casks and calculate dowry payments. Anything more complicated, and you're told that's what accountants are for. Your mother says it's unbecoming to worry about numbers when you could be learning the finer points of courtly bowing. Yes, bowing. There are drills for it. A proper Bathory bow involves a 30-degree angle, a perfectly blank expression, and enough knee strength to impress even the family fencing instructor. Then comes music and dancing. You're handed an instrument, usually a lute, sometimes a recorder, and occasionally a drum if your tutor has a migraine and wants revenge. You learn 3 songs, one for weddings, one for funerals, and one for when someone important drops by unexpectedly. Dancing is more like a medieval team-building exercise. You are partnered with siblings, cousins, or that one neighbor kid who always steps on your foot. You practice elaborate steps meant to show grace and breeding, but mostly designed to make sure no one's hiding a dagger under their doublet. There are, of course, more practical lessons: stitching, herbal remedies, and the all-important art of writing a thank you letter that implies never visit us again without actually saying it. For the boys, there's riding, swordplay, and archery, for defense and for sport, but mostly for settling arguments about inheritance. If you're lucky, you get a tutor who actually knows which end of the sword to hold. All of this takes place under the watchful eye of your main tutor, a man who claims to have studied with scholars across Europe and who definitely has a suspicious number of stains on his robes. He teaches alchemy on rainy afternoons, just in case the family needs a little extra gold. You spend hours watching him mutter over bubbling cauldrons, hoping that someday he'll accidentally turn the family cat into something less judgmental. Mistakes are inevitable. Forget a bow, mangle a Latin prayer, or knock over a candelabrum, and your punishment is another rousing lecture on family honor. Sometimes you wonder if there's a secret scorecard. But you survive, mostly intact, with your dignity only mildly frayed, and your handwriting just passable enough to forge your own sick notes. By sunset, you've been groomed, polished, and prepared. Not quite for greatness, but at least for the hope that your next appearance at court won't end up in a scandalous ballad. And in a Bathory world, sometimes that's enough. It's your wedding day, you're 15, your new husband is a war hero, and you're mainly concerned about whether the veil covers your acne. The honeymoon suite is a fortified tower, and the main gift is a stack of unpaid bills from the in-laws. You don't get much say in the festivities. The wedding planners are mostly your aunts, and their approach to subtle elegance involves 36 geese, 2 nervous minstrels, and a centerpiece that's more taxidermy than flowers. The whole affair is a cross between a royal summit and a livestock auction, complete with awkward toasts and that one uncle who keeps reminding everyone how much the dowry cost. The marriage ceremony itself is a marathon, priests, prayers, and enough Latin to make you question your commitment to conjugating verbs. The guest list includes everyone you've ever met, plus several people who claim to be related, and a handful of nobles who definitely just showed up for the wine. You do your best to look demure and obedient, which mainly means not tripping over your gown or blurting out any thoughts about running away to a convent. Spoiler: the convent is probably even colder than the castle. As for your new husband, he's fresh from the battlefield, covered in scars and stories, and very proud of his family crest. He's polite enough, at least when sober, and looks slightly bewildered by the entire ordeal, as if he'd rather be facing a cavalry charge than a receiving line of Bathory relatives. His main hobby appears to be collecting swords and ignoring the financial situation. He tells you that you look beautiful, though you're fairly certain he's talking to the enormous sapphire sewn onto your sleeve. After the ceremony comes the feast, an endless parade of questionable meats, suspicious stews, and that one fruitcake that seems to be passed down from generation to generation like a medieval family curse. You're given gifts, embroidered towels, silver spoons, and for some reason, a live goat. Your mother-in-law quietly explains which gifts are for show and which you can actually keep. The goat is apparently symbolic. Of what? Nobody is quite sure. Then it's off to the honeymoon suite, which is less romantic getaway and more windowless panic room. The bed is a medieval marvel, carved oak, squeaky springs, and sheets stiff enough to be used as shields in a siege. You're left alone to contemplate your new life, surrounded by tapestries of unhappy-looking ancestors and a faint but persistent draft that's probably haunted. Married life comes with a steep learning curve. Suddenly, you're in charge of a household staff who all seem twice your age and 3 times as suspicious. The cook pretends not to understand your accent, the maid spends her afternoons weeping, and the steward insists on showing you the family accounts. "Here is the debt ledger," he announces cheerfully, presenting a stack of parchment tall enough to qualify as its own relative. You'll want to avoid this column. That's just the horse fund. You're also responsible for producing heirs, preferably sons, though nobody says it out loud. Your husband's family is thrilled at the prospect, offering unsolicited advice about everything from diet to the correct position for sleeping. Everyone agrees the best method is whatever your grandmother did. You're pretty sure your grandmother threatened people with a poker until they did what she wanted. Romance is more theory than practice. Your husband spends most of his time out hunting, inspecting the stables, or reminiscing about the good old days before peasants invented taxes. When he is home, dinner conversation is a lively blend of military strategy and gentle reminders about whose turn it is to pay the candle bill. The biggest adjustment isn't the marriage itself, but the realization that you are now someone's property. Every decision, from the shape of the dinner rolls to the color of the bed linens, is subject to approval by someone who remembers the famine of '84 like it was last week. Independence is a myth, unless you count the time you hid in the library for 3 hours just to avoid discussing wallpaper samples. But you survive, you adapt. You learn the art of smiling politely while mentally planning your escape route and the subtle ways to stretch a dowry so no one notices the kitchen is out of salt. In the world of noble marriage, success is less about love and more about outlasting your in-laws, your creditors, and that one goat. And if you do it with your dignity intact, you're already winning. Welcome to your forever home. A stone castle with drafty halls, suspiciously squeaky doors, and a cleaning staff that seems nervous every time you walk by. The good news? Excellent views. The bad news? Everything else. You can see for miles in every direction, which is less about appreciating the scenery and more about keeping an eye on whether your in-laws are riding over for a surprise visit. The surrounding countryside is breathtaking. Rolling hills, dense forests, and, depending on the season, at least 3 varieties of mud. It's the sort of view that makes poets swoon and peasants consider moving to a nice, damp cave instead. Life at Countess is, how shall we put this, rustic. The stone walls are thick enough to stop an army, but somehow not thick enough to keep out the wind, the gossip, or that one bat who refuses to leave your bedchamber. Your first winter here, you learn that the castle has approximately 43 different kinds of drafts, all of them aimed directly at your feet. Heating is provided by fireplaces the size of small barns, which consume firewood faster than your relatives consume wine at Christmas. The plumbing situation is medieval, both in technology and in attitude. There's no bathroom, only a cold, echoing corridor leading to a garderobe, which is basically a hole in the wall that makes you question every life choice up to this point. You try not to look down. Bathing is an event, requiring 2 servants, a boiling cauldron, and enough soap to warrant its own ransom note. By the time the bath is ready, it's already cooled to the temperature of slightly regretful soup. The castle is a maze of staircases, dead ends, and odd rooms you're pretty sure weren't here last week. There's a tower nobody visits, a cellar everyone pretends doesn't exist, and at least one room permanently reserved for important storage that's suspiciously full of broken chairs and slightly cursed-looking candlesticks. The only map is in your head, and even that changes depending on how many torches are actually lit at night. Meals are a highlight, if only because you get to sit down for a while and pretend the kitchen is under control. The kitchen itself is a world of its own, full of clattering pots, shouting cooks, and enough steam to power an early locomotive. The food is best described as variable. Sometimes you get roast meats, fresh bread, and imported delicacies. Other nights, it's a stew so mysterious you're not entirely sure it didn't start moving on its own. If the bread cracks your tooth, congratulations, you found the day-old batch. Security is top-notch, assuming you consider rusty portcullis and 3 very suspicious dogs top-notch. The castle's main gate is built for defense, against invaders, relatives, or the occasional peasant uprising. After dark, the place transforms into a shadowy fortress, full of creaks and unexplained noises. If you sleep through the night without hearing at least one suspicious clatter or distant scream, it's probably just because you're too exhausted to care. Social life here is limited. Neighbours are a half-day's ride away, and most of the staff look like they're counting the days until their contract is up. The castle has its own brand of rumour mill, fueled by bored servants and echoing corridors. If you so much as rearrange the silverware, you can be sure someone in the village will hear about it by breakfast. Privacy is a fantasy. The only place you're truly alone is the West Tower, and even then you suspect the mice are holding their own family reunion. Of course, not everything is terrible. The sunsets are spectacular. The castle library, while drafty, is full of strange old books and the occasional love letter wedged into the spine of a cookbook. And there's something oddly comforting about knowing that, no matter how awkward a dinner party gets, you can always escape through a hidden passageway behind the fireplace, provided you remember which one doesn't lead straight to the wine cellar. So, Castle Countess is your fortress, your prison, your stage. You pace the echoing halls, greet the nervous servants, and try not to get lost in the maze of stone and shadows. Home is where the heart is. Assuming your heart is comfortable with a little frostbite and a lot of rumours. While your husband's off fighting the Ottomans, you're left managing 10 villages, 12 lawsuits, and 3,000 sheep with attitude problems. Delegation skills? 10 out of 10. Trust issues? Also 10 out of 10. There's no such thing as a day off when you're the lady of the manor. Your desk, actually, a slightly wobbly oak table covered in ink stains and mystery crumbs, is buried in scrolls, ledgers, and requests from tenants who seem to think you have a secret stash of gold and infinite patience. Most of your mornings are spent hearing complaints about boundary disputes, pig theft, and whose turn it is to clean the communal oven. The peasants bring their problems to you because your husband is away on campaign, which is medieval for unavailable for awkward conversations and actual responsibility. Your inbox, made of actual boxes, is full of urgent issues. There's the village miller, who's convinced his neighbour is using magic to sabotage his flour. There's the steward who claims the sheep are plotting against him. And let's not forget the priest who seems to believe that your job description includes settling theological debates between neighbours who share a goat. The only thing more constant than the complaints is the mud on boots, in hallways, and occasionally, it seems, in the soup. Estate management is equal parts logistics, diplomacy, and basic crisis intervention. You're signing decrees, settling feuds, and trying to figure out why the baker's apprentice keeps accidentally setting things on fire. It's a never-ending relay of news. The grain stores are low, the roads are flooded, and there's a strong possibility that one of the tenant farmers has started a rumour you're secretly a witch because you once fixed a jammed spinning wheel. You spend your afternoons sending sternly worded letters to neighbouring estates about runaway livestock, and reminding the castle cook that last year's surprise pie is still an open legal case. Running an estate means understanding the fine art of delegation. You have to trust your bailiff to collect rents without skimming too much off the top. You have to trust your reeve not to overwork the peasants, at least not more than the local average. You definitely have to trust your steward to balance the accounts, even when his arithmetic seems more creative than strictly necessary. You assign jobs with military precision. One servant handles the laundry, another tracks the cheese, and you personally keep the key to the wine cellar because some lessons have to be learned the hard way. Of course, trust has its limits. You keep the most important documents locked away, double-check every tax record, and quietly employ your own network of gossipy servants who report anything that sounds even remotely like embezzlement, rebellion, or a plan to move the maypole without permission. Paranoia? Maybe. Survival instinct? Absolutely. Then there are the lawsuits. Medieval law is a rich tapestry of ancient feuds, land disputes, and everyone's favourite pastime, accusing each other of stealing pigs. You attend court hearings in a drafty chamber that smells like burnt onions, listening to cases so ridiculous you start to question if anyone is actually sober. Today's highlight: 2 farmers arguing over which way a fence should lean. The judge, who's also your distant cousin, decides to split the difference by moving the fence into a puddle and declaring it a compromise. Let's not forget the livestock. You may have inherited land, but you also inherited the world's most dramatic sheep. They escape their pens with alarming frequency, staging what can only be described as woolly jailbreaks. The cows sulk, the chickens riot, and the goats, well, goats are just chaos with hooves. Every spring you oversee the great sheep count, which is like a census but with more bleating and less accuracy. Yet somehow you make it work. The fields are planted, the rents are mostly paid, and the villagers only occasionally threaten to move to Transylvania. You've mastered the art of getting things done, while keeping your dignity, your accounts, and your favourite cheese all in one piece. You might not get a statue, but you do get a seat at the high table, a reputation for iron will, and the grudging respect of everyone from the blacksmith to the bishop. Managing an estate isn't glamorous, but in the world of medieval nobility, it's about as close to being a CEO as anyone ever gets, just with more mud and way more sheep. Family dinners involve more tension than a season finale. Your mother-in-law keeps asking why the servants look so nervous, and your cousin wants to borrow money, for the 3rd time this month. At the long, candlelit table, conversation is a delicate dance of pleasantries and barely concealed threats. The appetizers arrive, pickled vegetables and the kind of bread that could double as a weapon in the right circumstances. Everyone eyes each other with suspicion, mentally calculating how many people at the table would, in fact, be pleased to see them replaced by a slightly less competent relative. Your mother-in-law, in full velvet regalia, likes to remind you that she ran this estate with half as many servants and twice as much self-righteousness. She points out the dusty windows, the slightly droopy tapestries, and the way your roast goose looks nervous, as if you personally gave it performance anxiety. She is also the undisputed queen of unsolicited advice. Want to know the best way to get wine stains out of a flagstone? She has a 3-hour answer. Wondering how to handle rebellious peasants? She has just a little trick that would make Machiavelli nervous. Your father-in-law, on the other hand, is a man of few words but many sighs. He grumbles about taxes, the weather, and the price of onions, all in equal measure. Mostly, he sits at the head of the table, polishing a family signet ring and glaring at anyone who dares mention change. His conversational style is best described as passive-aggressive thundercloud. Cousins, aunts, and various hangers-on populate the rest of the table. Every family meal feels like a town council meeting run by a pack of slightly tipsy wolves. There's always at least one relative angling for a loan, another pitching a brilliant business idea, spoiler, it's always beekeeping, and someone trying to convince you to hire their son as the new steward, even though he once set fire to the henhouse during a demonstration of innovative lantern placement. Passing the salt can take 20 minutes, since it's used as a subtle signal for secret alliances. If someone hands you the pepper without being asked, congratulations, you're now involved in a plot against the cook or possibly the neighbor's miller. Dessert, when it finally arrives, is a tense affair featuring suspiciously lumpy custard and even more suspiciously pointed family anecdotes. Everyone remembers your least dignified childhood moment and feels it's their duty to share it. Meanwhile, the servants tiptoe through the dining hall like mice, trying not to wake a sleeping cat. The younger maids, new to the job, haven't yet learned that every dropped fork is a potential international incident. The older ones have mastered the art of blending into the background, listening for the sound of raised voices, and preparing the emergency wine for when the family inevitably brings up inheritance. Your spouse, to their credit, attempts small talk about the weather, which leads to a 15-minute debate on whether last year's hailstorm was divine punishment or just the natural result of Cousin Tibor's poor manners. No one really wins, but everyone feels personally attacked. The best you can do is smile, nod, and deflect any attempts to assign you additional household chores or new tenants with mysterious debts. After dinner, there is the time-honored ritual of the after-supper stroll. The men grumble their way to the library to argue about local politics, while the women gather in the parlor, ostensibly to discuss embroidery, but actually to dissect every single thing you did that evening. Did you see how she buttered the bread? Not like we do it. So sad. If you're lucky, the evening ends with only mild scandal. Someone spilled wine on the tapestry. Someone else accidentally insulted a bishop, and the family dog absconded with the leftover sausages. In the world of medieval in-laws, survival isn't about grace or wit. It's about patience, a thick skin, and knowing exactly when to pretend you didn't hear the question about the missing candlesticks. One thing's for sure, you can survive battles, sieges, and scandal, but family dinner is where the real test begins. You dabble in herbal medicine because what else is a noble woman to do on a Tuesday? Soon, rumors swirl that you know too much about cures, curses, and how to make a cold compress that doubles as a hex. It all starts innocently enough. A neighbor with a cough, a cousin with a rash, a servant with a headache big enough to fell a warhorse. You consult the family recipe book, part herbal manual, part diary, part collection of revenge fantasies scribbled in the margins. Your signature remedies involve things like dried nettle, lavender for nerves, and that secret salve you swear by for everything from chapped lips to political plots. You mix, you boil, you mash up roots and wildflowers until the whole castle smells like a salad that's past its prime. But nothing you do goes unnoticed in the Bathory household. The cook complains that you've borrowed the best pot for scientific reasons. The steward wants to know why the pantry is short 3 onions and a suspicious quantity of vinegar. Your in-laws ask if it's normal for a poultice to be that green, and a passing priest raises an eyebrow at the collection of bottles on your bedside table. The truth is, No one trusts a woman who knows her plants, especially when she can tell belladonna from basil at a glance. It isn't long before your little experiments draw attention outside the castle. Word spreads to the village. The lady knows a cure for fevers, a remedy for warts, a potion to help your livestock sleep through thunderstorms. Peasants start showing up at the gates with mysterious aches and awkward requests. You're popular, but it's the nervous kind of popular. Like a local celebrity whose fans think she might accidentally turn them into a frog. Of course, all this attention comes with a downside. The line between wise woman and witch is thinner than a soup made by a medieval cook after Lent. The local priest watches you closely, as if you might sneak a spell into the communion wine. Gossip flourishes. Suddenly, you're being asked why the steward's toothache got better so fast, why the baker's wife is expecting twins, and whether the chicken you blessed actually laid a golden egg, or just a very shiny regular one. You develop a reputation, part healer, part walking ? For every person grateful for your ointments, there are two who whisper that you talk to plants. You do, but only to complain about the weather. The castle staff eye your remedies with suspicion, as if they might sprout legs and chase them through the halls. You're asked for love potions, luck charms, and once, for a lotion that could banish the memory of my cousin's poetry night. But in medieval Hungary, being a woman with answers can be dangerous. The moment someone's rash fails to heal, or a sheep drops dead from sheer bad luck, you become the prime suspect. She was just too clever, they whisper in the marketplace, and her ointment smelled too nice. It's only a matter of time before the word witch floats through the village like a persistent draft. To protect yourself, you start adding extra prayers to your recipes, just enough holy water to make the local priest feel included. You donate healing balms to the poor and bake extra bread for every church festival. You feign ignorance when asked about rare herbs and only admit to knowing the safe, God-fearing plants like rosemary and mint. Belladonna? Never heard of her. Henbane? Must be a new neighbor. Even so, you keep practicing. Someone has to look after the sick, soothe the fevers, and try to keep the castle from succumbing to plague, or at least bad moods. It's a risky business, being both helpful and competent. But you'd rather be remembered as the woman who healed with a smile and, a slightly suspicious ointment, than fade into the background, silent as a sack of dried nettles. Just remember, in the world of medieval herbal medicine, the real cure is to never, ever run out of plausible deniability or rosemary. Your husband comes home from war, missing some teeth and the ability to process feelings. Communication is mostly yelling, swordplay, and the occasional shared meal of boiled cabbage. Romantic. His homecoming is a grand affair, servants lining the castle courtyard, minstrels valiantly attempting a tune that isn't just minor key weeping, and relatives who've practiced looking both relieved and vaguely disappointed. The hero returns, armor battered, hair slightly singed, and stories that start with when I was knee-deep in mud and somehow always end with a lecture about the price of decent horses. You're expected to greet him with a mixture of admiration and gentle chastisement, which is tricky when his main conversation starter is a rundown of his latest injuries. He has at least 3 new scars, a collection of broken weapons, and an inexplicable aversion to cabbage, despite it being the only thing the cook can still boil without an accident. You smile, pour wine, and listen to tales of glory that sound suspiciously similar to last year's tales, just with different body parts and slightly larger wolves. Living with a war hero means getting used to a new household rhythm. He paces the halls at night, muttering about supply lines and the utter disrespect of rival knights. He examines the castle fortifications every morning, offering helpful suggestions like you could fit 3 archers in that window if you stacked them carefully. Occasionally he attempts bonding time, which is medieval code for let's race horses in the rain until one of us nearly breaks an ankle. Romance is mostly theoretical, buried beneath layers of tradition, awkward silences, and the shared trauma of stew gone wrong. Your date nights are candlelit meals in a hall cold enough to store perishable goods punctuated by your husband explaining battlefield tactics using leftover bread as tiny doomed soldiers. If you compliment his sword, he grunts. If you compliment his armor, he looks alarmed and checks for missing buckles. Affection, when it appears, is accidental. Sometimes he brings you a trinket from his campaigns, a coin from a distant city, a feather from a particularly unlucky bird, a half-broken dagger he claims is historic. Other times, his idea of a compliment is, you'd make a fine cavalryman. You take what you can get. At least he's not comparing you to his horse anymore. Conversations tend to veer toward logistics. How many sheep survived the last storm? Is the roof leaking more or less than when he left? Has the blacksmith finished repairing the armor stand, or did it just give up and become a bench? Every question is an opening for a minor disagreement, resolved either by sighing, fencing, or both. The castle staff has developed a keen sixth sense for when to discreetly exit a room, usually at the first mention of strategy. Sometimes, though, the war hero persona slips, and you catch glimpses of the young man beneath the armor, a quick smile, a joke at his own expense, a rare moment of uncertainty when he asks about the children, the estate, or how you're really managing. These are brief, fragile pauses before the next round of repairs, rituals, and roasted root vegetables. The pressure to maintain appearances never really disappears. You're a power couple. After all, the estate relies on your stability, the tenants rely on your judgments, and your in-laws rely on you not embarrassing the family during feast days. Every argument is conducted with an eye on the door, just in case someone is listening. Every reconciliation is as much about politics as it is about feelings. Still, you find your own version of connection. Maybe it's sitting in companionable silence while the fire sputters, or sharing a loaf of bread that didn't quite burn. Maybe it's laughing quietly at the absurdity of trying to build a marriage with someone who'd rather joust than talk about his emotions. In the end, you make it work, the Bathory way, with stubbornness, sarcasm, and the knowledge that no matter how many wars he fights, the real battles are always at home. Your husband dies, leaving you wealthier and even more alone. The villagers are starting to gossip, and your castle is full of echoes and, depending who you ask, ghosts. In the days after his funeral, the castle is a confusing blend of solemn silence and awkward opportunity. The official period of mourning begins. You wear black, you host endless candlelit prayers, and you try to avoid the world's most judgmental choir. The cook weeps into the soup. The steward wrings his hands over inheritance documents. Your in-laws descend like particularly well-dressed vultures, sniffing around for any loose heirlooms or misplaced livestock. Being a widow is a full-time job. There are rules for everything. There are rules about how long to mourn, how loud to mourn, and how not to appear too cheerful lest people start talking. There's a rule about where to place your husband's sword, not in the soup apparently, and another about what shade of black your veil should be, which somehow manages to make you look even paler and more mysterious, perfect for scaring children and minor clergy. The neighbors start speculating about your next move before you've even put away the funeral leftovers. Are you planning to remarry? Will you join a convent? Will you simply haunt the castle, drifting from room to room like a very annoyed breeze? Everyone has an opinion, and most of them are delivered in stage whispers that echo off the stone walls. If you so much as smile at the baker, expect 3 new marriage proposals and at least 1 awkward cake delivery. With your husband gone, your responsibilities double overnight. You're now in charge of everything: land, tenants, staff, finances, lawsuits, and, for some reason, the care and feeding of a flock of particularly demanding peacocks. You quickly discover that being a widow does not mean fewer decisions. It means answering every question, signing every document, and politely refusing every attempt by your second cousin to help with the wine cellar. Loneliness sets in, disguised as freedom. You have your own rooms, your own keys, your own schedule. You can eat dinner in the library, breakfast in bed, and lunch on the roof if you feel like braving the local pigeon population. But the castle feels larger now. Its quiet is thick and sticky, punctuated only by the creaks of settling stones and the echo of your own footsteps. Servants scuttle around, careful not to disturb your morning, which mostly involves staring out windows and contemplating how many relatives are quietly hoping for a generous bequest. And then there are the ghosts, real or imagined. There are always stories in a place this old, lights flickering in the corridor, distant laughter when everyone's in bed, and that one tapestry that never seems to hang straight. Some say your husband lingers, sighing his way through the halls, lamenting unpaid debts and unfinished business. Others are sure it's just the wind and a slight excess of cabbage at dinner. Either way, you get used to living with the possibility that you are not, in fact, alone with your own thoughts. Suitors appear almost immediately, as if summoned by some medieval matchmaking algorithm. A minor baron sends flowers and a truly alarming portrait of himself posing with his favourite falcon. A local merchant brings gifts, wine, cheese, and a business proposal. Even the priest drops hints about finding comfort in companionship. You respond with polite indifference and the occasional well-timed reference to your very strong opinions on inheritance law. Gossip multiplies. Every time you travel to town, the villagers invent a new theory about your love life, your health, or your taste in soup. You become a local legend, equal parts object of pity and subject of suspicion. Some say you possess secret knowledge. Some say you have a treasure hidden beneath the castle. A few, after a little wine, claim you're already plotting your next grand adventure, preferably one involving less cabbage. But you survive. You adapt. You learn to enjoy your own company and the freedom to make your own mistakes. Widowhood in the Bathory castle isn't just an end, it's a blank page. And if you fill it with echoes, ambition, or even a little mischief, well, at least you're living life on your own, slightly haunted terms. You're rich, powerful, and increasingly suspicious that everyone is after your land, your fortune, or your favorite recipe for sour cherry jam. Every knock at the door is either a tax collector or a cousin with bad news. Power has its perks, but mostly it has paperwork. You wake up each day to a stack of messages, ranging from polite invitations that are really thinly veiled demands for money, to formal complaints about your chickens escaping into the neighbour's turnip patch. There are endless legal documents to sign, ledgers to review, and suspicious gifts from people you barely remember meeting at last year's harvest festival. Your quill hand is permanently ink-stained, and your reading spectacles have become part of your face. The wealth is undeniable. You have rooms full of tapestries, cellars lined with barrels of wine, and more jewellery than you can wear in a lifetime, or at least without injuring your neck. Your wardrobe is an evolving fortress of silk, velvet, and the kind of lace that could smother a small dog. But with every new luxury comes a new reason to worry. Is your cheese taster actually loyal, or just waiting for a bigger bribe? Did the stonemason really fix the West Tower, or did he simply pocket the silver and leave a goat inside as a housewarming gift? You start to notice little things. The steward lingers a little too long when collecting the accounts. The chambermaid is oddly curious about your travel plans. Even the kitchen boy has developed a sudden interest in family genealogy. You realize that, as the lady of the estate, you're both the spider and the fly in this medieval web, handing out favors with one hand while clutching your keys and secrets with the other. Then there are the family members, both close and distant. Each new arrival at the castle brings the possibility of a new conspiracy, or at least another person who will claim to have forgotten their purse at dinner. Your calendar is a rotating parade of cousins, uncles, and third-removed nephews, all arriving with fresh tales of hardship and subtle hints about available bedrooms. Just for a week, they say, and 6 months later they're still recovering from the journey and have joined the cheese-tasting committee. Trust, as it turns out, is a luxury you can't really afford. You keep your valuables under lock and key, sometimes double, sometimes triple, depending on the number of relatives within 50 miles. You invent errands to check on the tenants, just to make sure no one is digging a suspiciously deep well near your vault. Even your personal priest is eyed with caution, especially after the unfortunate incident with the missing communion wine and a half-written confession. And yet, the perks are very real. When you snap your fingers, things happen. Need a new gown? The seamstress appears, tape measure in hand. Want to try the latest foreign cheese? The steward dispatches a man on horseback before you can finish your sentence. Fancy a midnight snack? The kitchen can produce roast quail, honey cakes, and, if you're lucky, a single jar of that legendary sour cherry jam smuggled from your own pantry and not, for once, lost to the butler's midnight cravings. The downside of all this privilege is the creeping sense that every relationship is transactional. Every compliment might be a setup for a request. Every party invitation could be an opening move in a slow-motion negotiation for land, cattle, or access to your private library. You develop a sixth sense for detecting ulterior motives. It's like hosting a never-ending audition for the role of least suspicious person in the room. Still, you carry on, head high, purse tightly clutched, and a polite smile that says, "I see you, cousin, and no, you may not borrow my favorite horse." Power isn't always comfortable, but it's certainly never dull. Paranoia becomes just another part of your daily routine, along with inventory checks, polite refusals, and making sure the jam recipe is hidden where no one will ever find it, except maybe the next lady in line. Managing castle staff in 1600 Hungary is less HR and more Game of Thrones. The turnover rate is suspiciously high, and nobody wants to be on laundry duty. Your recruitment process is a chaotic blend of family recommendations, local gossip, and the occasional bribe. Every time you find a halfway decent cook or a maid who can carry a tray without fainting, your rivals immediately try to poach them. Sometimes literally. The best servants are already working for the wealthiest families in the region, so you're left choosing from the less than enthusiastic applicants. Farm boys who'd rather be chasing chickens, and girls who learned housework by watching their grandmother angrily sweep dust under the rug. Retention is another matter. The castle is cold, drafty, and haunted by at least 2 varieties of ghost, and a third kind of ominous draught that whispers secrets in the pantry. You offer decent wages, meaning enough bread to keep their families from rioting, and an endless supply of laundry. The problem is, your reputation precedes you. Word gets around about the demanding lady of the manor, the kitchen that never sleeps, and the laundry room where hope goes to die. Laundry duty is the medieval equivalent of a punishment posting. The sheer volume of linens, ruffs, petticoats, and whatever mysterious garments your in-laws have imported from Florence is enough to bring a strong man to tears. The water is ice cold, the soap is mostly wishful thinking, and the only thing more relentless than the stains are the rumours about what actually happened to the last 3 laundresses. You're not sure, and you're afraid to ask. Training new staff is an adventure. You show them the castle, explain which rooms are off limits, for their own safety, and sometimes for your peace of mind, and try to teach them which end of the broom is which. There's always one overly eager footman who insists on improving the system and inevitably moves the silverware so efficiently that no one can find it until Easter. The housekeeper, a woman whose stare could crack walnuts, does her best to keep things running. She's part mother hen, part drill sergeant, and part secret keeper for every scandal from the past 20 years. Discipline is a delicate balance between stern warnings and outright bribery. Threaten to cut rations, and half the staff starts planning an early retirement. Offer extra beer, and suddenly everyone's volunteering for latrine duty until they realize what it actually involves. The annual staff dinner is a tense, cautious affair. The maids gossip in corners, the footmen eye the wine like it's a life raft, and the butler makes a point of counting all the silver before and after dessert. Attrition is the unspoken truth of noble life. Some staff leave for better prospects, a merchant's household, a monastery, or a village where the chickens don't bite. Some simply vanish, their absence noted with a shrug and a new name added to the help wanted list. A few, the true survivors, adapt. They learn when to disappear, when to listen, and how to avoid any tasks involving mysterious stains or late-night errands to the West Tower. The truly unlucky are reassigned to garden duty, which mostly means pulling weeds and dodging the angry geese. The staff dynamic is a living, breathing, mildly dysfunctional organism. There are alliances, rivalries, and more power plays than a chessboard. The kitchen competes with the laundry, the grooms plot against the gardeners, and everyone is convinced the steward is secretly pocketing the best cheese. The castle survives on this delicate balance, a constant churn of complaints, whispered rumours, and, occasionally, outright bribery with pastries. Yet somehow, the castle keeps running. Meals appear, fires are lit, and your favourite slippers turn up, eventually. It isn't easy managing a medieval workforce, but you make it work by equal parts authority, cunning, and the subtle threat that, at any moment, you could reassign anyone to laundry duty. If only modern HR could be so effective. Your wardrobe is to die for. Possibly literally. Perfume, elaborate wigs, and so many layers that by the time you get dressed, it's already time for dinner. Bathing is complicated. There's no hot water, but there are rumors. Getting dressed is less a routine and more a strategic campaign. First, the base layer. A linen chemise so starched it could stand on its own. Then, petticoats, underskirts, bodices, overskirts, sleeves that need to be laced on by an assistant with the forearms of a blacksmith, and finally, a gown heavy enough to double as chainmail. Each item of clothing is designed to signal your status, your taste, and whether you have the upper body strength required to walk up a single flight of stairs. For accessories, you have gloves, fans, and enough jewelry to make a pirate reconsider his life choices. Your hair is another daily ordeal. If it isn't braided, it's powdered. If it isn't powdered, it's covered with a headdress so elaborate it requires a diagram. Wigs are in, especially ones that look like you might have a minor bird sanctuary hidden in the curls. Your maid spends half her time teasing out knots, and the other half quietly cursing the distant cousin who sent you that experimental hair tonic. Perfume is not a luxury, it's an arms race. Scents of rosewater, lavender, and something vaguely medicinal are carefully dabbed at the wrists and behind the ears, though mostly to mask the fact that the castle's idea of fresh air is whatever manages to drift in through the arrow slits. In the winter, you opt for clove or cinnamon to distract from the faint whiff of damp wool. In the summer, you simply pray the wind is in your favour. Bathing, meanwhile, is the medieval version of an obstacle course. Hot water is a luxury reserved for saints and the terminally ill, so you make do with lukewarm bucketfuls, boiled with great ceremony and hauled upstairs by 2 servants and a prayer. The tub is wooden, draughty, and determined to leak. You schedule baths sparingly, lest the villagers start talking, again, about your unusual habits. There are, after all, rumours that frequent bathing invites sickness, or worse, the evil eye. You compromise with daily face washes, the occasional sponge bath, and enough perfume to choke a goat. Laundry is its own adventure. Fine linens are scrubbed and aired out on the battlements for all to see, a parade of stains, tears, and mysterious scorch marks that become the talk of the kitchen staff. The truly delicate items are entrusted to the most reliable maid, who promptly locks herself in a closet for 3 hours of gentle weeping. There's always at least one chemise that turns an alarming shade of pink, thanks to a creative attempt to remove wine stains. Your clothes aren't just a statement, they're a warning. To the villagers, your towering wigs and brocaded gowns are a sure sign of otherworldly power. Children hide behind their mothers as you pass by, convinced that anyone who wears that much lace is surely either a witch or royalty, maybe both. Local artists beg to paint your portrait, but only after confirming you're not planning to wear the blue velvet thing that makes the cows nervous. Of course, fashion is pain. There's chafing, pinching, and the ever-present threat of accidentally catching a sleeve in the fireplace. Stays dig in, stockings slip down, and your shoes, handmade, stylish, and completely unsuited to walking on actual ground, leave you teetering across flagstones like a baby deer with ambition. By the end of the day, you look regal, smell expensive, and have lost all sensation in your toes. Still, you wouldn't trade it for anything. Looking good isn't just about vanity. It's about projecting power, confidence, and the subtle suggestion that you're definitely not to be trifled with before your first goblet of wine. In the world of medieval nobility, fashion and hygiene are your armor, protecting you from judgment, disease, and, occasionally, small talk at feasts. You love a good soak, but rumor has it your baths are unusual. Are these just elaborate spa treatments? Or is the guest soap suspiciously red for a reason? The peasants are starting to talk. To be fair, a proper bath is already a logistical feat in Castle Countess. You don't just run a tap, your tub must be dragged out of storage, usually from the room where things we don't discuss are kept. Then, half the staff is conscripted to haul buckets of water from the well, up 3 flights of stairs, around 2 suspicious puddles, and into your private chambers. By the time they're done, everyone smells like soup, and the castle's water pressure, meaning actual people, needs a week to recover. Baths are not everyday events. In this climate, they are occasions, half wellness ritual, half military maneuver. You might go weeks without one, savoring the anticipation, and letting the natural oils protect your skin, or so the medical experts of 1600 claim. When the day arrives, you set the mood. Candles flicker in the corners. Wild herbs are scattered across the stones, and somewhere, a nervous maid is trying to remember if rosemary is for relaxation or to ward off ghosts, or both. Once the tub is full, lukewarm at best, murky at worst, you slip in and pretend you don't notice the occasional leaf, twig, or unidentifiable speck drifting by. The scent is earthy. Your bath oils are a proprietary blend of wildflowers, secret petals, and a dash of imported perfume, rumoured to be worth more than half the sheep in the county. You close your eyes, breathe in the aroma, and try not to think about whether the water's colour is natural or a sign that the laundry maid mixed up her buckets again. Of course, no amount of relaxation can keep out the rumours. Servants whisper that your bathing rituals are too frequent, meaning more than once a month, and too private, meaning behind locked doors. Word spreads to the village. The lady is up to something. Why does she need all those herbs? Why is there always a bowl of mysterious red liquid on the windowsill? Did anyone actually see what was in last week's bath, or are they just assuming it was water? It doesn't help that you enjoy your spa days with a flair for the dramatic. Maybe you add rose petals, which float like ominous omens. Maybe you ask for the fire to be stoked high, so the chamber fills with enough steam to make the walls sweat. Maybe, just once, you asked for a handful of leeches for medicinal purposes, and the cook hasn't looked you in the eye since. Little details, easily misunderstood by anyone with an imagination and a love for a good story. And then there's the guest soap. You always insist on having special soap, hand-milled and coloured with exotic berries, because you refuse to scrub yourself with the same stuff the stable boys use. But to the staff, every splash of colour is suspicious. If a maid spots a reddish streak in the tub, it must be blood. If a towel is stained, clearly something unspeakable has happened. By the time the story gets to the local inn, you're practically bathing in a cauldron, cackling with villainous glee. You try to ignore it. You write it off as the price of nobility. After all, what's a little gossip compared to a good soak? But deep down, you know there's no stopping a rumour once it gets started. So you add an extra dash of lavender, lock the door a little tighter, and enjoy your spa day as only a slightly maligned Hungarian countess can. In the end, it's hard to say if your baths are sinister or just misunderstood. But if the choice is between being the subject of whispers or walking around caked in medieval grime, you'll take the luxury and the rumours every time. Just don't ask for the guest soap recipe. That's a family secret. You're obsessed with looking young, so much so that you'll try any treatment. no matter how expensive, questionable, or, in some cases, illegal. The 16th century equivalent of Instagram filters involves less Facetune and more folk remedies. In the world of Hungarian nobility, looking old is a professional liability. Wrinkles aren't badges of wisdom, they're warnings to your rivals that you might be past your political prime. Every morning begins with a frantic inspection in the nearest polished goblet. Is that a new line on your forehead? Or just a particularly judgmental streak of candle wax? Better not risk it. You summon your maid for urgent consultation, and soon the chamber is an alchemical lab, bowls of mashed berries, pots of goose fat, and enough dried herbs to season a year's worth of stew. Your beauty regimen is part science, part superstition, and part wild improvisation. Want to smooth out your complexion? There's a cream for that, made of egg whites, ground pearls, and, if you believe your aunt's advice, just a pinch of powdered unicorn horn, which suspiciously resembles powdered chalk. Freckles are treated as a public menace, and everyone has an opinion on how to get rid of them. Lemon juice, vinegar, or simply never going outdoors again. For dark circles, you dab on compresses of chilled turnip slices and try to convince yourself you're glowing and not just slightly damp. The more desperate you become, the more elaborate the rituals. You endure face masks that sting, plasters that tingle, and the occasional application of something that smells strongly of horse ointment. There are herbal infusions to drink, powders to sniff, and beauty tonics so vile they make you briefly consider embracing your wrinkles as a mark of character. But giving up is not an option. Every other noblewoman is on the same quest, and you're not about to let Lady Catelyn get the upper hand in the annual Who Looks Youngest in Bad Candlelight contest. Cosmetics are, officially, frowned upon. Unofficially, they are everywhere. The local apothecary has a side hustle mixing blush from beetroot and foundation from crushed shells. You learn to apply colour with a steady hand and a sharp eye. Too little, and you look ill. Too much, and you look like the castle's resident jester. Your lips are tinted, your eyebrows darkened, and your cheeks pinched for natural colour. If anyone asks, it's all just good health and a joyful heart. If anyone presses, you mutter about family secrets and change the subject to the weather. There are, of course, more dangerous solutions. A few drops of mercury in the eye cream, a hint of arsenic in the face powder. The theory is that a little bit won't hurt you, and besides, you have a castle to run and an image to maintain. It's a risk you're willing to take, at least until your left eyebrow starts twitching independently. Even your doctor, who usually recommends bloodletting as a cure for everything, tells you to maybe ease up on the heavy metals. The quest for youth never ends. There are rumours of baths in rare milks, rubs with gold leaf, and one unforgettable incident involving a sheep, 3 nuns, and a recipe no one will ever repeat. Every solution is temporary, every result debatable. But the pursuit itself is non-negotiable. Your staff learn to compliment you at the right times and avoid any remarks about maturity unless they want to be reassigned to cleaning the stables. And yet, the clock keeps ticking. The candles burn lower, the mirrors get dustier, and the local children start calling you lady instead of miss. Some days, you almost envy the village women who get to age in peace. Their only cosmetic, a little honest dirt, and a lot of good humour. Almost, but in the castle, appearances are everything. You smooth another cream over your face, tell yourself you look positively radiant, and prepare for the next round of polite scrutiny at dinner. If youth is a myth, it's one you're determined to chase, with or without the turnip mask. Whispers start to spread. Maybe it's jealousy, maybe it's that you're always hiring new chambermaids, maybe it's because you fired the local priest. In any case, your PR team is working overtime. It begins innocently enough. Just a few side eyes at the market, a couple of conversations that go silent when you walk into the room. But soon, rumours are breeding faster than the castle's mice. At first, it's the usual noble grumbling. She's too rich, she's too smart. She once ordered dinner in Latin, and the cook's never been the same. But quickly, the stories start to take on a life of their own. You're accused of everything from hoarding salt to summoning thunderstorms to hexing the neighbor's favorite goat, and the goat hasn't been right since. You try to ignore it. After all, managing a reputation is just another part of the job. You increase the bread donations, throw an extra festival, and smile politely at every mention of the unfortunate incident with the turnip cart. But for every rumor you squash, 3 more pop up. It doesn't help that you're always in need of new household staff, and the local hiring pool is running dangerously thin. People start to wonder, why do so many maids come and go? Is the pay really that bad? Or is something darker at work in Castle Countess? Your in-laws are no help at all. If anything, they fan the flames. Aunt Elizabeth drops cryptic remarks about some families having secrets, and Cousin Janos is suddenly writing letters to anyone with a title and a tendency to panic. Even your most loyal servants are starting to flinch whenever you call their name. The castle feels larger and emptier all at once, as if every hallway has become a secret passage for rumors to scuttle through. The villagers love a good scandal, and soon everyone's got a story about the lady in the tower. She's seen wandering the halls at midnight. She keeps strange hours. She's far too interested in herbs, ointments, and the lunar calendar. One creative farmer swears he saw you riding a broom, but, to be fair, it was probably just a particularly bad hair day. Still, facts are optional when it comes to a good story. And then there's the church. That business with the priest you fired, technically he was just reassigned to further spiritual growth in the farthest possible parish, comes back to haunt you. The new priest is wary, always offering extra prayers whenever you walk by. The bishop writes, "Just checking in." Letters at an alarming frequency, as if a pen and a lot of wax seals will keep you from cursing the baptismal font. Meanwhile, your own attempts at damage control seem to backfire. You throw a charity banquet and someone faints into the soup. You sponsor repairs for the chapel roof, and the bell falls down during Mass. You commission a portrait to look friendly and approachable, but the painter decides to give you the ominous stare special. Now you look like you're about to sentence everyone in the village to a week of cold porridge. Of course, the more you deny, the worse it gets. If you try to laugh off the rumors, you're not taking things seriously enough. If you protest too much, you're clearly hiding something. You can't win, so you do what any sensible noblewoman does. You retreat to your tower, plan your next move, and start a new hobby, collecting evidence of other people's scandals, just in case you need to redirect public attention. Gossip is a hungry beast, and you're just the latest snack. But you've survived worse. Family dinners, peasant uprisings, that one time with the poisoned goose. If this is the price of power, you're ready to pay it. And if the villagers want stories, you'll make sure they remember yours, whether it's as a monster, a martyr, or just the lady who always tips well at the market. People get sick in your castle. Some never recover. Is it disease, bad stew, or something darker? The local apothecary is running out of plausible deniability. At first, it's just sniffles and complaints. A chambermaid with a cough, a footman with a mysterious rash, a stable boy convinced he's dying of spontaneous chills. You send for the village healer, who arrives smelling of onions and mysterious hope. She prescribes garlic for everything, garlic for coughs, garlic for bruises, garlic to ward off evil spirits and slightly overbearing relatives. For a while, things seem to improve. The staff begins to smell like a salad, and the wolves stop lurking quite so close to the walls. But soon, the symptoms get stranger. One maid faints in the middle of sweeping the great hall. The cook loses her voice after taste-testing a questionable sausage. The steward, usually a model of surly resilience, develops a rash that looks suspiciously like a map of Hungary. Everyone blames the laundry, or the weather, or the last batch of imported wine. And, of course, the rumors start. Maybe the castle is cursed. Maybe someone is poisoning the soup. Maybe it's the new ointment you recommended, which everyone agrees smells dangerously effective. The local apothecary is summoned more often than the priest. He prescribes remedies ranging from very strong tea to lying very still and hoping for the best. His toolkit includes a variety of alarming implements, an encyclopedic knowledge of herbal lore, and an attitude of weary resignation. Sometimes, he mutters, the only cure is for everyone to stop talking about it. But even he starts to look nervous as the cases pile up, each stranger than the last. In an attempt to reassure everyone, you host a wellness day in the Great Hall. There are bowls of broth, platters of slightly overcooked vegetables, and lectures about the importance of hand washing. Unfortunately, your demonstration of how to properly cleanse the hands leads to half the staff burning their fingers on a hot kettle and the other half convinced you're conducting a ritual. The village priest swings by with extra holy water, just in case, and blesses the entire east wing for good measure. Meanwhile, the castle gossip mill is running at full tilt. Some say the illnesses are punishment for vanity. Others whisper about the curse of a long-dead ancestor or the consequences of not finishing your porridge as a child. There's even talk of the blue fever, a mysterious medieval ailment said to turn your skin the color of bad cheese and leave you speaking in riddles. You try to investigate, but every time you ask a direct question, someone faints, cries, or launches into a confession about stealing extra bread. As days turn to weeks, the paranoia spreads faster than the actual illness. Servants swap beds, sleep with garlic under their pillows, and refuse to eat anything that hasn't been personally inspected by 3 witnesses and a cat. The castle physician suggests bloodletting, leeches, or, as a last resort, moving to Venice, where the air is less haunted. You briefly consider it, but the logistics of transporting your wardrobe and your collection of secret recipes are daunting. Your own attempts at medicine are met with mixed results. Some find relief in your herbal teas and salves. Others claim your ointment burned away all their sins. You're praised, feared, and quietly asked if you can make a potion to ward off nosy relatives. The line between healer and suspect blurs, and every time someone sneezes, a maid crosses herself and runs for the chapel. Eventually, most recover, at least physically. The castle resumes its usual rhythm of chores, rumours, and complaints about the soup. But the episode leaves its mark. A little more caution, a lot more garlic, and a lingering suspicion that in a castle this old, the real plague is never just germs. It's the endless cycle of fear, folklore, and a truly alarming lack of hand sanitizer. Your household staff keeps shrinking, but your guest list stays full. The neighbours are starting to notice, and suddenly everyone's daughter has a summer job in another town. At first, you blame the usual suspects. The miserable weather, the never-ending laundry, the cook's new obsession with putting garlic in everything, including dessert. Medieval servant life is hard, cold mornings, endless chores, and the ever-present possibility of being reassigned to the West Tower, which nobody enters willingly. Still, lately the departures have become a little too frequent, a little too final. One day a scullery maid is scrubbing pots. The next her bed is neatly made, her apron is folded, and the only trace she leaves behind is a particularly judgmental dust bunny. As the numbers dwindle, you begin to notice patterns. New hires arrive wide-eyed and hopeful, only to lose their enthusiasm, and sometimes their actual shoes, within a week. Some vanish after just a few awkward dinners, others disappear quietly, with only a cryptic note or a half-finished embroidery to mark their passing. The castle's help-wanted notice is now a permanent fixture at every village market, and the phrase "good references required" is mostly code for must be able to run very fast. The staff gossip mill is working overtime. Some claim the disappearances are just the natural way of things. Young people move on, fortunes change, the allure of city life, or at least a village with less suspicious soup, is strong. Others whisper about bad omens, the ghost in the cellar, the curse on the laundry, the ladies' private interviews that seem to happen right before someone packs their bags. You try to reassure everyone, but every time you open your mouth, someone faints, bolts for the kitchen, or remembers they urgently need to check on the goats. It's not just the staff. The neighbours are starting to talk, too. Suddenly, Their daughters have travel plans, their sons are learning a trade in the next county, and every invitation to send a relative for work is met with a tight smile and a promise to let you know if anyone is available. You're still invited to the village festivals, but you notice the children eyeing you from a safe distance, clutching their parents and whispering things that probably rhyme with witch. The local priest adds extra holy water to every blessing. The baker's wife delivers bread to the castle gates, but no longer steps inside. You attempt damage control, wages are raised, hours are eased, and there's even a new staff appreciation dinner, though the turnout is thin and the mood is more funeral wake than office party. The steward proposes hiring from farther afield, but even the travelling merchants seem wary of the opportunity. The last one took a wrong turn in the cellars and emerged convinced he'd seen something with more legs than a goat and a worse attitude than your mother-in-law. Every lost servant becomes a new rumour. Some say they eloped. Some say they ran off to join a band of travelling actors. Highly unlikely. Have you seen the local acting troupe? The wildest theories are, naturally, about you. Are you sending them on secret missions? Are you hiding them in the tower for breaking a teacup? Or, more sensationally, are you using them in your famous beauty treatments? You really shouldn't have joked about a little peasant foot bath at last year's feast. The truth, of course, is less exciting and more tragic. Castle life is tough, your reputation is darker than a root cellar at midnight, and medieval job security is about as stable as a three-legged stool. Still, the whisper campaign grows. You post more help-wanted notices. The castle feels emptier, the chores pile up, and even your favourite candlestick looks nervous. In the end, you're left with a skeleton crew, a lot of nervous energy, and the haunting feeling that, in Castle Countess, every disappearance writes itself into legend, whether you like it or not. Time to address the elephant in the bathhouse. Are you really bathing in blood? Or is this the greatest smear campaign since medieval Yelp? Spoiler, there are a lot of stains but not many answers. If rumours were currency, you'd be the richest person in Hungary by now. The tale is everywhere, whispered by maids in drafty halls, retold by travelling merchants, and embroidered by your enemies until even the local chickens have an opinion. Supposedly, you've turned Castle Countess into the region's first luxury spa/crime scene, specialising in treatments so exclusive your guests never return home. And, just to be clear, these stories don't mention aromatherapy. The rumours start small, strange red stains on laundry day, the occasional basin that looks like it's seen better and less dramatic days, and, of course, your own taste for mysterious beauty rituals. The castle's cleaning staff have become amateur detectives, reporting every drop, drip, or suspiciously burgundy hand towel as evidence. You'd think someone invented crime scene tape centuries early, given how often the halls are closed for cleaning. Enter the medieval forensic team, a priest with a keen sense for scandal, a few local gossips with sharp eyes, and the village apothecary, who has been waiting his entire career for an excuse to poke around the upper floors. They examine the stains, ask loaded questions, is this beet juice or something thicker, and scribble down their findings in official-looking ledgers. One even brings a magnifying glass, which does little more than magnify his own confusion. For every mysterious stain, there's a perfectly mundane explanation. At least, that's your story, and you're sticking to it. Wine spills, nosebleeds, an unfortunate incident involving a roast duck and an overzealous carving knife. Not every red mark is a sign of villainy. Sometimes, it's just evidence that medieval kitchens are chaotic and napkins are tragically underused. You even try a grand demonstration, inviting the staff to witness a bath, only for the water to turn an uninspiring shade of beige and half the audience to faint from the sheer boredom. Still, the rumours are stubborn. For every story you disprove, 3 new ones appear. My cousin's friend's sister saw something. The laundry girl found a slipper covered in red. The colour red takes on mythical properties. Raspberry stains are suspect. Red wax is scandalous. And heaven help you if the pantry runs out of paprika. The villagers are convinced you're up to something nefarious. mostly because they'd rather not believe your favorite bath oil is just crushed petals and desperation. As the stories escalate, you find yourself starring in every local nightmare. Some say you bathe in blood to preserve your youth. Others claim you're cursed to scrub away your sins forever. There are even a few creative souls who argue that you're actually a vampire, citing your dislike for garlic, untrue, avoidance of daylight, entirely weather-based, and questionable taste in velvet capes. The authorities eventually get involved, drawn by tales of missing servants and suspicious stains. They conduct investigations, question everyone who's ever set foot in the castle, and leave more confused than when they arrived. Their official report concludes: the Lady of Countess enjoys baths, employs clumsy staff, and keeps an unusually well-stocked pantry. Not quite the sensational headline they'd hoped for, but it keeps them occupied for a week. Behind closed doors, you sigh and scrub your hands, sometimes from exasperation, sometimes just because there really is a lot of beetroot in the kitchens. You try to ignore the suspicious glances and focus on the important things: running your estate, keeping your secrets, and maybe switching to white towels for a while. In the end, the truth is slippery. Maybe it's all fiction, maybe it's history's greatest smear campaign, or maybe the real stain is on the collective imagination of a village that loves a scandal. Either way, in the world of Castle Countess, the line between fact and fiction is as blurred and as red as the stains on your best linen. Local authorities are suspicious. You're summoned to court more often than a dodgy landlord. Witchcraft, murder, and tax evasion are all on the table. Bring your best cloak. The moment your name lands on a summons, the whole castle goes into crisis mode. Your staff panic about what to wear. Your lawyer, if you can call Cousin Andras with his one law book and a chronic fear of candles a lawyer, tries to remember the difference between innocent and plausibly distracted. You dust off your most imposing cloak, polish up your testimony, and practice your absolutely not a witch smile in the nearest tarnished mirror. The journey to the court itself is an ordeal. There's mud, there are potholes, and there's at least one roadside preacher, warning everyone about the dangers of unladylike knowledge. When you arrive, the courthouse smells like old cabbage and unresolved tension. Every other seat is filled with a relative, either accusing, defending, or just there for the entertainment value. The local officials, equal parts judge, detective, and gossip columnist, are eager for a show. They begin the proceedings with a list of charges so long it might actually be longer than your family tree. Suspicious behavior, unexplained stains, knowing Latin, and, perhaps worst of all, possessing too many cats. You plead not guilty, but everyone knows the trial isn't really about evidence. It's about spectacle, and possibly about giving the town something to talk about besides the price of onions. Witnesses are paraded in, each with a story that gets a little wilder every time it's told. The village herbalist claims you once cured her headache with nothing but a look. The baker's apprentice swears he saw sparks flying from your fingertips when you lost at dice. Your second cousin, eager for a starring role, describes a mysterious midnight meeting, neglecting to mention it was just you returning his library book. All the while, the jury, composed of your most easily startled neighbours, listens with rapt attention, munching on walnuts and whispering about signs and portents. You attempt a rational defence. You point out that herbal remedies are not the same as dark magic, that missing laundry is not evidence of murder, and that tax records are only confusing because you inherited them from someone with very creative handwriting. Your appeals to logic fall on mostly deaf ears. They'd much rather speculate about your cursed cheese recipe and the rumour that your cat once hissed at the bishop. Cross-examination is a circus. The prosecutor asks you to recite prayers, identify suspicious herbs, and demonstrate you don't float when dunked in water. You do your best, though you refuse to be weighed against a sack of flour on the grounds that your dignity and your wardrobe can't handle the comparison. Someone in the audience suggests you try to fly. You politely decline. The longer the trial drags on, the more you realize it's less about justice and more about theatre. Each day brings fresh accusations. A neighbour's crops failed. A child caught a fever. A dog barked at the moon. All roads, it seems, lead back to you. Still, you remain composed, if not for your sake, then for the entertainment of the servants, who've started placing bets on which charge will stick. Eventually, the court reaches a verdict. You're officially found guilty of being unnaturally interesting. There's a fine, a stern warning, and the promise of watchful eyes upon you at all times. In other words, you'll continue being the local legend, with a slightly higher legal bill and a few more stories to add to your reputation. You return to Castle Countess, head held high, knowing that in Hungary's Got Talent for drama, you're the reigning champion, whether you wanted the title or not. And next time you're bringing a better lawyer. And maybe fewer cats. The investigators arrive, and they're not here for the castle tour. Suddenly, being a Bathory isn't so fun. Your pen pals stop answering letters, and your favourite recipes are confiscated as evidence. It all begins with a pounding at the door, a sound that, in medieval Hungary, never bodes well for anyone with a large estate and a slightly questionable reputation. The castle is quickly overrun by men in stiff uniforms who spend a suspicious amount of time peering into cupboards and tapping on the walls. Routine procedure, they say, as if anyone believes that. Your housekeeper nearly faints, and the steward tries to bribe the investigators with his last wheel of cheese. You are informed, politely but firmly, that you are the subject of a major investigation. The list of charges is longer than your winter laundry roster. Missing persons, financial improprieties, unnatural interests, and, most egregiously, possessing more scented candles than is strictly necessary. Every corner of the castle is fair game, from the cellars, where only the bravest servants dare go, to the West Tower, which even you try to avoid after dark. Servants are interrogated, closets are turned inside out, and your beloved Herbal pantry is inventoried like it's a dragon's hoard. The worst part isn't the official questions. It's the awkward silences. The entire estate is suddenly full of people who would rather be anywhere else. The cook won't make eye contact. Your favourite maid tiptoes around as if you've become invisible, and the family priest develops a sudden fascination with blessing the stairwells. The neighbours, once so eager for gossip, now cross the street when they see you coming. It turns out that, in a crisis, everyone wants to be as far away from you as possible, unless they're holding a notepad and a badge. Every item in your possession becomes potential evidence. Your embroidery is scrutinized for secret codes, your cookbooks are read for poison recipes, and your journals are treated as if they contain the lost secrets of the ancients, when in fact, most entries are just complaints about the laundry and requests for better bread. Your beloved jar of imported honey is seized for analysis, and you're left with nothing but the stale end of a loaf and a lot of questions about how much worse things can get. You're confined to quarters, house arrest, they call it, though the castle feels more like a labyrinth of shame than a home. Your world shrinks to a handful of cold rooms, drafty corridors, and a single, ever-watchful guard stationed at your door. You try to keep busy, reading old letters, pacing the floor, making increasingly desperate attempts to teach the mice embroidery. Time blurs. Each day is marked by the clatter of investigators, the scratch of quills, and the occasional howl from the tower, probably just the wind, but at this point, who's sure? Loneliness sets in, more bitter than the Hungarian winter. Once, you were the centre of a bustling household, feared, admired, and, if you believe the rumours, possibly magical. Now, you're a cautionary tale in progress, reduced to listening for news through the walls and wondering which of your acquaintances will betray you next. Letters from allies dry up. The family lawyer suggests you reflect quietly and not make things worse, which frankly is easier said than done when all your books are now in evidence. There's a kind of freedom in being a public enemy. You no longer worry about appearances, because no one is looking. You no longer host dinners because no one is coming. You have all the time in the world to think about past decisions, future regrets, and whether you should have burned your more incriminating correspondence years ago. The investigation drags on. Accusations multiply, rumors grow wilder, and the line between fact and fiction disappears altogether. All you can do is wait, wonder, and plot your next move, if, of course, anyone ever gives you back your kitchen. Until then, you settle in for a long winter of suspicion, stale bread, and the knowledge that being infamous is a lot less glamorous than the stories make it sound. House arrest means spending years alone in a room with nothing but your regrets, a suspicious number of rats, and maybe a guilty conscience. You have plenty of time to knit, read, or write very dramatic diary entries. The first few days are a blur of confusion and awkward adjustments. At first, you try to keep up appearances. You insist on your usual breakfast routine, rearrange your surviving dresses, and maintain the air of a noblewoman merely between appointments. But castle captivity is not the vacation it's made out to be. The door is locked from the outside. Your meals arrive via a servant who looks at you as if you might transform into a bat at any moment, and the view from your window is less romantic vista and more impressive collection of pigeon droppings. With all this time, you develop hobbies you never wanted. Knitting is a useful distraction until you run out of yarn and are forced to unravel your own shawl for creative purposes. Your embroidery becomes increasingly elaborate, depicting not flowers but satirical portraits of your least favorite relatives, and occasionally a rat in a crown. When you tire of sewing, you read anything left behind: cookbooks, old sermons, a particularly gripping manual on roof repairs. Every diary entry grows more dramatic, transforming the slightest inconvenience into a tragic saga. Day 37. The bread was stale. Will I survive this hardship? Only time will tell. The castle, already echoing, grows cavernous in isolation. No more bustling servants, no visitors, and the only footsteps are your own. Sometimes you talk to the rats. Sometimes they answer. You learn to distinguish individuals: big rat, slightly smaller rat, and the mysterious third rat, who may or may not be a figment of your hunger-induced imagination. They become a Greek chorus to your private dramas, squeaking their approval or horror as you narrate the day's indignities. Loneliness, at first a novelty, soon settles in with the permanence of mildew. You remember the noise, chaos, and bickering of castle life with a certain nostalgia, even the endless requests for money, advice, or fresh bread. Now, your most exciting interaction is trying to interpret the servant's expression as she slides a tray of cold soup under your door. You fantasize about eavesdropping in the great hall, or just hearing human voices, gossip, complaints, even criticism of your hair. Your mind wanders, replaying old choices and what-ifs. What if you'd hosted fewer suspicious dinner parties? What if you'd been less enthusiastic about herbal remedies, or at least more selective in your hiring practices? You write hypothetical apologies to relatives you never liked, then cross them out and replace them with snarky footnotes. Guilt competes with irritation, regret with boredom. There's time to second-guess every decision, and even more time to invent new grudges for future use. If there's an upside, it's the freedom from pretense. No more tight gowns, forced smiles, or tedious etiquette. You sleep when you want, wear what you want, and occasionally dance around your room in your nightgown, an activity that terrifies the rats and, you hope, confuses anyone spying through the keyhole. You become an expert at pacing, sighing dramatically, and reciting long speeches to your increasingly judgmental audience of shadows. Seasons change. The light in your room shifts from harsh to golden to nearly non-existent, and you learn to measure time by drafts under the door and the thickness of your boredom. Occasionally, rumors filter in. A new scandal in the village, a distant war, a cousin who has been accused of something even stranger than your own alleged crimes. You take solace in knowing you're not the only Bathory with a complicated legacy. In the end, You realize captivity is its own kind of legend, one you survive with a little wit, a lot of stubbornness, and perhaps a touch of delusion. Your story is no longer written by gossips or officials, it's stitched, inked, and muttered in the dark, ready to escape the moment the door opens and someone finally says, "You're free." Until then, you'll wait. With your regrets, your rats, and the most dramatic diary in Hungary. Did you really do all those things? Or were you the victim of a political smear campaign? Historians can't agree, but the rumours are stickier than medieval honey. The line between fact and fiction in your life is so blurred, it might as well be written in beet juice on damp parchment. Even you start to wonder, as you sit in your drafty room, what exactly happened, and how much was simply the fever dream of a society addicted to scandal. When the world wants a villain, it will find one, or make one out of whoever's handy, especially if she has sharp cheekbones and a suspiciously well-stocked herb garden. You replay the big events over and over, turning them this way and that like a priceless gem, or maybe just a very complicated turnip. Did you really fire all those servants? Or did most of them just leave when the soup got too weird? Was that midnight scream the sound of a terrible crime? Or just the cook discovering another mouse in the flour bin? Your own memories feel as unreliable as a Hungarian weather forecast, mostly cloudy, chance of wild accusations. Rumours are a noble's worst enemy. One day you're just trying to survive another round of in-law visits and impossible bread. The next day you're the centerpiece of Hungary's juiciest gossip mill. Did you invent new spa treatments? Or were you experimenting with what little comfort medieval life allowed? Was your unusual interest in bathing just good hygiene or evidence of witchcraft and vanity? No one wants to believe you were just tired of smelling like cabbage. And then there are the servants. So many stories about so many disappearances, most of which can probably be explained by the irresistible lure of better wages, or at least a job in a castle with fewer unexplained stains. But once the whispers start, they snowball. The castle's chilly halls echo with every rumour. She did it. She didn't do it, but she wanted to. She did something, and that's bad enough. You try to correct the record, but every denial only makes the stories more interesting. The authorities, for their part, never quite figured it out. They investigated, catalogued, questioned, and came away with more questions than answers. Your reputation, carefully cultivated and sometimes spectacularly misunderstood, was all too easy to twist. Did you have enemies? Absolutely. Did some of them have access to wax seals, heavy paper, and a talent for creative storytelling? Even more absolutely. A smear campaign is easy when your world is already painted in shades of suspicion. And then there's the role of power. A woman with wealth and land, running things her own way, is always going to attract attention. Most of it negative. Your rivals called you dangerous. The villagers called you fascinating. Historians, centuries later, can't quite decide whether to write you as a monster, a martyr, or just a misunderstood manager with a very high turnover rate. Your life is footnoted, disputed, and rewritten with every new academic fad. Even now, as you review your own story, you see the layers, the legend, the reality, and all the messy human details that never make it into the grand narratives. You wanted order, comfort, a bit of beauty, maybe even a little respect. You got infamy, legend, and an afterlife as a Halloween costume. In the end, maybe the truth is both simpler and stranger than the legend. You were a Bathory, sometimes careful, sometimes reckless, always a survivor. Maybe you were framed. Maybe you made mistakes. Maybe you simply lived at the wrong intersection of gender, power, and extremely unfortunate gossip. But as history has proven, reality rarely matters as much as a good story. And if your name is going to live on in whispered tales and lurid headlines, you might as well hope someone finally gets the details right. Or at the very least gives you credit for your taste in capes and your unwavering commitment to daily baths. Long after you're gone, your story takes on a life of its own. You become a Halloween costume, a horror movie icon, and the answer to the question, who had the worst beauty routine in history? Sweet dreams. Some people dream of legacy, of statues, libraries, maybe a nice public square named in their honor. Not you. Your legacy is candlelit and crimson, stitched together from centuries of gossip, bad translations, and a handful of creative historians with a flair for the dramatic. Generations after your actual demise, likely not involving a bloodbath, unless you count the one your kitchen staff had to clean up after that unfortunate beetroot incident, the name Bathory will send a shiver down spines and launch 1,000 clickbait articles. Your afterlife isn't quiet. Instead, it's loud, theatrical, and occasionally available in 4K Ultra HD. The storytellers come first, scribes, monks, and traveling poets who can't resist the urge to turn a messy, complicated life into a cautionary tale. Did they get your hair color right? Of course not. Do they mention your clever management of 12 villages? Absolutely not. But everyone knows the bit about bathing in blood. It's catchy, it's horrifying, and, best of all, it's completely unverifiable. Medieval PR at its finest. Centuries pass. Your name slips from whispered rumors into the pages of pulp novels, gothic horror tales, and midnight radio programs. Victorian authors, always in search of a good shiver, imagine you as a vampire in a lace collar, eternally young, eternally misunderstood, and definitely overdue for a skincare intervention. In the 20th century, filmmakers arrive, armed with gallons of fake blood, mood lighting, and a script that gives you the personality of a bored theatre student with a minor in creative hexing. On screen, you are reinvented over and over. Seductress, villainous, tragic anti-heroine, misunderstood manager, that woman with the weird spa day. Actresses in rubber fangs and rented castles deliver lines about eternal beauty while tripping over 6 layers of petticoats and struggling to keep a straight face. By the end of the film, you're either locked in a tower, chased by an angry mob, or vaporized by lightning. Sometimes all three, depending on the budget. The internet era only supercharges your afterlife. Wikipedia users argue about how many victims you allegedly had, debate the chemical composition of medieval soap, and link your name to every unsolved mystery east of Vienna. Forums light up every October as amateur historians, horror fans, and sleep-deprived students ask, wait, did she really bathe in blood? Or was that just a metaphor for a really bad exfoliant? You become a meme, a trivia question, and, inevitably, the inspiration for at least 3 questionable true crime podcasts. There's merchandise, too. Bath bombs in suspiciously red packaging, Countess Bathory perfumes that promise eternal youth, results not guaranteed, and novelty t-shirts that read, I take my baths old school. Escape rooms and haunted houses invent whole new floors for your castle, each with more secret passages, fake skeletons, and spooky lighting than the real thing ever managed. You're everywhere and nowhere, as real and as fictional as anyone who ever got caught in the crossfire of gossip, power, and a really good story. And so, your legend marches on, part history, part Halloween, all confusion. You become shorthand for the dangers of unchecked ambition, bad public relations, and the perils of letting your enemies control the narrative. Historians keep arguing. The movies keep rolling. Teenagers dress up as you every October, and somewhere, a distant descendant Googles your name and sighs. As for you, if you get any say in the afterlife, you're probably watching it all with a mix of horror, pride, and the world's deepest eye roll. Not everyone gets to haunt Wikipedia, after all. In the end, it's not so bad. Immortality minus the mess plus unlimited costume changes. Sweet dreams, indeed. Managing a noble estate means an endless stream of paperwork. Most of it either lawsuits or angry letters from neighbors whose goats have mysteriously vanished. You try to keep up, but after page 50, your handwriting looks like someone sneezed in Latin. Every misspelled word could be the start of a war, or worse, a visit from a tax collector. Your writing desk, once a symbol of authority, is now an overflowing avalanche of scrolls, letters, and ledgers. Some documents are official: land deeds, birth certificates, records of grain shipments, but most are part of an ever-growing correspondence pile that includes everything from bread recipes to pointed threats about turnip theft. There's even a weekly update from the local cheese guild, which you suspect exists solely to make you feel guilty about your dairy consumption. Every morning you gird yourself for battle with ink and quill. You start with the easy ones. No, you may not graze your sheep in the cemetery. Yes, the well has been cleaned since last year's unfortunate incident. No, the castle is not haunted unless you count the rats. By letter 20, your wrist aches and your patience is running as thin as the soup in last month's famine. You try to keep your tone polite. After all, a careless yours truly can be interpreted as either a diplomatic olive branch or an open invitation to duel. The lawsuits are relentless. Someone's always suing someone else. Peasants arguing over the width of a fence, rival nobles contesting ancient boundaries, or the miller claiming that your dog gave his donkey a dirty look. Every dispute requires a formal response, preferably in Latin, with no fewer than 3 official seals and a creative use of legal terms. Your cousin's advice is to just stamp everything pending, but that only works until the judge starts showing up at your gate with a quill and a very stern expression. Then there are the tax documents, pages and pages of baffling math, cryptic abbreviations, and columns of numbers that only add up if you squint, cross your fingers, and ignore reality. You suspect your steward invented a few new taxes just for fun, judging by the line item labelled miscellaneous goose-related fees. The tax collectors themselves are an annual menace. They arrive with an entourage of minor officials and a checklist that includes inspect the wine cellar, for entirely professional reasons, and sample the cheese, also professional, allegedly. Every error in your accounts is an excuse for another fine, another round of paperwork, or, worst of all, another visit. It's not just the volume that wears you down, it's the pressure. One smudged name, and suddenly you're feuding with a baroness over the rights to a particularly average orchard. One missing document, and your neighbour accuses you of harbouring his lost goat, which, to be fair, is currently making itself very comfortable in your stables. The legal language is a minefield. Too formal, and you sound guilty. Too casual, and you sound guilty. Latin, pretentious. Hungarian, too familiar. German, that's just showing off. Even love letters become entangled in bureaucracy. You receive at least one a month from a minor, noble proposing marriage, a joint lawsuit, or both. The handwriting is always atrocious, the spelling even worse, and the closing line usually includes something deeply unsettling about the weather or a mutual dislike of taxes. You file them away with a sigh, adding unwanted proposals to your growing list of correspondence-related grievances. To cope, you develop a system: urgent letters in one pile, lawsuits in another, tax threats in a third, and everything else stacked neatly for later, which, in practice, means never. You invest in better ink. Try dictating to a maid, who writes even worse than you, and eventually resort to the timeless noble tradition of misplacing the most annoying documents until the sender forgets why they were angry in the first place. At the end of the day, your desk is still full, your hand is cramped, and your spelling is even more creative than your tax deductions, but you survive. In a world ruled by paperwork, questionable penmanship, and neighbours with grudge-holding goats, it's not about keeping up. It's about staying just one step ahead of the next lawsuit, or at least the next tax collector. Sometimes, you have to leave your chilly castle and make an appearance at the royal court. It's a confusing blend of lavish banquets, side-eye, and people pretending they don't know your reputation. Everyone's plotting, backstabbing, and judging your shoes. You smile politely and hope no one brings up that bloodbath rumor during appetizers. The trip to court is an ordeal in itself. You pack half your wardrobe, 2 trunks of emergency capes, and enough scented handkerchiefs to ward off every bad smell between Countess and Vienna. Your carriage bumps along roads that are equal parts mud, potholes, and regret. You arrive fashionably late, dust off your travel cloak, and prepare to do battle, not with swords, but with subtlety and a spectacularly fake smile. The royal palace is a different world, warm, bright, and full of chandeliers that could feed a peasant village for a year. Courtiers sweep past in waves of silk, jewels, and glances that are equal parts admiration and suspicion. You feel the weight of 100 eyes, each cataloguing your dress, your hair, and that one earring you suspect is on backwards. The room hums with whispered gossip, and you know, absolutely know, that at least 3 people are betting on how long it'll take before someone mentions the baths. Courtly conversation is its own Olympic sport. Everyone is trying to appear clever, charming, and just concerned enough about the political situation to sound loyal, but not enough to seem dangerous. Your opening line is carefully chosen. Isn't the weather dreadful for travel? This, of course, is a test. If your companion nods sympathetically, you're safe. If they reply, "Ah, but some people find cold water invigorating," you know you're already doomed. At dinner, you're seated between a bishop who collects enemies like commemorative spoons and a baroness whose laugh could cut glass. The menu is lavish. Roast swan, spiced pears, a cheese course that lasts longer than most marriages. Your goal is to eat as little as possible, both because you don't trust the kitchen and because no one looks dignified wrestling a marrow bone in front of the king. The conversation never really leaves safe territory. Hunting, taxes, that one time the river froze, and, inevitably, your unique bathing habits. Networking at court is a blood sport, minus the obvious blood, usually. Alliances are forged over wine and broken by dessert. You trade compliments. Your ruff is exquisite. So is your loyalty. And try to decipher who is plotting your downfall, who is merely curious, and who might actually be a friend. Though at court, friendship is mostly just a pause between betrayals. You make mental notes of every sideways glance and every toast delivered with too much enthusiasm. The entertainment is always lavish, occasionally unsettling. Jugglers, poets, and minstrels perform, competing with the court jesters, who are slightly less terrifying than the Queen's ladies-in-waiting. There's dancing, of course, and you're expected to glide across the floor with grace, poise, and the ability to keep your shoes from squeaking. All the while, conversation never truly stops. It just changes tone, grows sharper, or gets lost in the sound of clinking goblets and veiled threats. Throughout your stay, you must be equal parts chameleon and steel trap. You nod sagely at stories you know are lies, compliment hunting dogs you suspect are actually wolves, and field questions about the castle, your estate, and, inevitably, that one peculiar rumour, with a laugh that's just the right mix of harmless eccentric and please don't press charges. The trick is never to deny anything outright. In court, denial is as good as a confession. Deflection, on the other hand, is an art form. By the end of the week, you're exhausted, your shoes are ruined, and you're more convinced than ever that nobody at court actually trusts anybody else. You say your goodbyes, accept a suspiciously large basket of pears, and retreat to your drafty home, grateful for its cold stone walls and the absence of mandatory small talk. You survive, unscathed, if slightly more paranoid. In the world of royal networking, that's as good as a standing ovation. Just don't forget to check your back for daggers and your bathwater for rumours when you get home. Every family has a black sheep. Yours is just more vocal. There's always that one cousin who remembers every awkward childhood secret and now suddenly wants to visit for a few weeks. The only thing more dangerous than a bored noble is a bored noble with a good memory and too much wine. It starts with a letter, not the polite kind, but the sort written on expensive paper and sealed with so much wax you wonder if the sender has shares in a candle factory. The message is full of nostalgic references. Remember when we used to race snails in the pantry? How's the tapestry with the unfortunate wine stain? From your 16th birthday, I believe. You groan, crumple the letter, and brace yourself. You know what's coming, an extended stay, just to catch up and escape the city's drama, which, translated from noble speak, means I've run out of people to annoy at home. Soon, the cousin arrives. He sweeps into the castle with a trunk full of gossip and an agenda as long as the winter. He's got a sharp eye, an even sharper tongue, and a tendency to linger near doorways during important conversations. The servants instantly recognize him as trouble. The dogs, more discerning, refuse to share their beds. No detail escapes his attention. He comments on the draft in the East Tower. Surely you could afford another fur curtain. The slightly wilted roses in the garden. Remember when you insisted on growing those, despite everyone's advice? And the mysterious stains on the flagstones, wine or something thicker. He spends afternoons in the library, reading your old letters and sighing loudly at the most incriminating parts. Even your diary is not safe. You catch him trying to decipher your code, which is really just bad penmanship and a lot of sarcasm. Family meals become a circus. Every awkward childhood memory is aired like fine linen. Remember that time you hid under the table to avoid Aunt Margit singing? He says. Just as the servants bring out the soup. Or when you insisted the West Tower was haunted and then locked yourself inside for a whole night. The rest of the table hangs on every word, delighted by stories that make you sound foolish, reckless, or both. You try to steer the conversation to safer topics, local crops, recent weather, the price of salt, but it's no use. Your cousin is on a roll, and there's no stopping him once he's started on the legend of the missing apple pie. Of course, a bored cousin with a sharp memory is a political liability. He's watched everything, learned even more, and now has an audience of staff, relatives, and the occasional nosy neighbour. He drops hints about your unusual interests, your penchant for herbal remedies, and the special locks on your study door. He claims he's just joking, but you notice the local priest taking notes and the steward locking the wine cellar at night. Every night, after far too much wine, the cousin gets philosophical. What's it like being the family legend? He asks, eyes twinkling with mischief. Do you ever wonder what they'll say about you when you're gone? You smile politely and change the subject, perhaps to goat theft or the weather, or anything less incriminating than the truth. After a few weeks, the cousin's visit finally ends, but not before he leaves behind a trail of new stories, several awkward silences, and at least one accidentally borrowed candlestick. You breathe a sigh of relief, grateful that your secrets are safe for now, at least until the next family gathering, when they'll all come roaring back with extra details and twice as much dramatic flair. In the end, you learn that, in noble families, memory is both a weapon and a curse. You survive another round of cousinly chaos, a little wiser and a lot warier of any letter sealed with more than the usual amount of wax. And so, as the candle guttered out in your imaginary stone chamber, we reach the end of another long, questionable day in the life of Elizabeth Bathory. You've survived castle intrigue, suspiciously sticky bathtubs, more lawsuits than a modern HOA, and a rumour mill that would make Twitter seem merciful. Along the way, you learned that even the most powerful people in history still struggled with in-laws, drafty rooms, and the existential terror of running out of clean socks. Tonight, as you settle into your soft, suspiciously blood-free bed, maybe whisper a thank you to the centuries of ancestors who braved not just lice and leeches, but also the medieval PR machine. Because if you think your social media reputation is a mess, just remember, at least no one's accusing you of inventing the world's worst spa treatment. History, as we've seen, is mostly the story of ordinary people, and a few extremely extra ones, trying to stay warm, stay fed, and avoid ending up as a cautionary tale. People like Elizabeth remind us that no matter how weird or terrifying things get, humanity just keeps muddling through, one questionable decision at a time. So as you tuck yourself in and drift towards sleep, be grateful for modern plumbing legal representation, and beauty routines that don't involve livestock or anything you'd see on a police report. Because while the past is full of hardship and horror, it's also a testament to just how stubborn, hopeful, and accidentally hilarious people can be. Rest well, and may your dreams be filled with nothing more sinister than a slightly overcooked dinner. Good night.